Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming here today. This is the 4TU Research Data Roadshow, and this is the AI and Ethics Introduction and Debate. I'm Alessandra Soro, the Community Manager of 4TU Research Data. I see a lot of new faces and people from my team, so thank everybody for coming over. This event was powered by the National Open Science Week. So I will ask everybody who is interested to please join the Open Science community by finding this QR code here. You can do it now, or you can also do it later. We're going to stay here for a while. So I'm going to tell you how this day is going to go. We're going to have first an introduction by Alessandro Bozzon about AI in research and development. And after that, our debate will start. So you see probably on your seat these two small pieces of paper. They are going to be useful for the debate, and I will tell you more about it later. So don't make like origami out of it. So basically the program is from 1:30 to 2:40. We're going to have the Oxford style debate, and then from 2:50 to 15:10, we're going to have a little interactive conversation about licenses and ownership and sense of ownership in academia. I invite everybody to stay along because I think it's going to be interesting to hear all of your opinions about it. But enough now. I will leave the floor to Alessandro.
Thank you. Thank you, Alessandra. This works? Yes, fantastic. Cool. Thank you for inviting me here today. It's a pleasure. This is a fantastic initiative. My congratulations for organizing it. It's actually very cool to talk about AI and ethics on a broader sense. In this format, I think it's fantastic. What I have the task of doing in the next 10 minutes is to somehow give justice to this very complex topic. Right? AI is a system technology. I suppose that all of us here have been hearing news, reading articles already for years, and probably they're tired. So what can I say new and interesting in 10 minutes about it? Probably very little. So the best I can do is to try to give maybe a good intro and a good heads up for the discussion that comes later. And that's what I'm trying to do. What is AI anyway? Typically, when you have these introductions, you have either two types of people: the ones that somehow condemn how all this hype is shenanigan, and there is nothing really serious about it, or the ones that are going to hype it to the greatest extent. I guess that depends on how much they have invested in stocks, or really how they believe into it. Personally, I consider myself a responsible techno-optimist. I'm a computer scientist. I've been doing AI research myself for a long time. I think you can do amazing things with it, but as any tool, it can be used for the wrong reason or in the wrong way, and so we should be very careful. It's a powerful technology. We have to be careful about it. Let's forget for a second all these projections of super intelligence or this type of discourse. We're talking about a very simple technology, a predictive technology that is either using logic, some form of formal representation to represent knowledge in order to do predictions, or some form of statistical inference for the same purpose. There is no higher level reasoning. There is there is some varying level of autonomy, but nothing that resembles what is in our worst nightmare or in documentaries like Terminator 2. I think that's how some policymakers refer to that particular movie, as a potential documentary. My take, AI is a technology done by human, for human, through human. Humans are the starting point. Those are technological artifacts that go beyond the simple one-to-one interaction we think about. This is also called, I think, in our Dutch research agenda, system technologies. Those are technologies that involve a lot of stakeholders in a lot of different roles. It is not only about developers. We're not talking about unicorns, like ethical unicorns or philosophical unicorns, people that are perfect or should have the ambition of becoming perfect. We're talking about complex systems with many different people. And because of that, there is, in my opinion, a better way to study and design those systems, right? One that starts from people's need, people's requirement, people's understanding, using the sort of methodologies that, for instance, we develop a lot in the Faculty of Industrial Design Engineering, right? But not only, like human-centered design, more than human design, and so on. And also focusing a lot in the interrelational elements of it. So what people do with it, how people interface with the technology, what do they get out of it, what are their aspirations, what is that they really want to achieve. So humans make the AI. For me, disabusing from the idea that we have the most difficult problems that nobody can ever solve and an AI will solve them is a very silly way to go about it. Right, so that's actually sometimes how we do it. We have very complicated scenarios that no human can meaningfully address, and therefore we hope the AI will do it. That's leading nowhere, right? So when we look at this technology, I think it's much more productive to look at problems that we know can be solved by people, but we just simply want to delegate it to a technology because it's just more convenient, right? Complex problems, wicked problems, those are for people to deal with, right? AI is a tool that can help making our life a little bit easier by taking away those tasks that are not really nice. What was the joke coming around lately? I didn't want my AI to do my writing, I wanted to do my dishes, right? So that's, to some extent, is also my spirit here. A lot of opportunities in science, in research, in education. I'll show some automating workflows for sure, co-creativity and co-creation. We can do really a lot in science with it. I'll show a couple of examples. We can actually use it to run very complicated systems that will become, well, too much for people to run. Again, delegating what, might be too tedious. For example, one way to use it, I think, in a smart way is to scale up our ability to discover and explore, to explore large solution spaces. Right, so imagine this in terms of human labor. People can run in their lifetime experiments in the order of hundreds, right? Time, unfortunately, is constrained. As we evolve from, human labor in science, in R&D, through computational methods, we were able to scale up one order of magnitude, the amount of research we could do. With the high-power methods, we can actually scale up many orders of magnitudes. And that's great, right? We can do things like, better exploring the space around the Earth to find more asteroids. That's a very manually intensive work. It turns out that if you use some smart computer vision, you can scale up the amount of asteroids near Earth you can find in a very short amount of time. That sounds nice, arguably. We can discover new materials much faster. Right? We can, for instance, explore synthetically a large amount of potential molecular structures to find a subset which is amenable to experimentation and then leave to people the job of properly experimenting with them. Right? We can, in a matter of hours, I think, arrive to, millions of potential good structures that then people can test. So we can make advancement in areas like material sciences much faster. We can help to support knowledge processes in general. So this is an example from EKI lab, so one of the innovation lab at national level with DSM and Kickstart AI, where we are developing with them a knowledge management system where it will be easier for scientists to synthesize knowledge and apply that in the design of new experiments and new experimental trajectory. So applied work to boost, increment the creativity, the productivity of a particular venture. We can also use it as a scientific partner, right? So who in this room hasn't at least, wasn't tempted at least one to get the AI to write their abstract or introduction? It turns out that they can, through language models and systems like that, we can do it very, very well, right? So studies come out on a daily basis showing that, ChatGPT-4 can write introduction sections better than humans. Why would anybody delegate to a ChatGPT that's beyond me? But no, you can, if you want. You can even go as far as to generate new research ideas, right? So creativity is just pseudo-randomness, some people think. So let's just not give it to a language model and see what comes out. It doesn't work very well. So apparently novelty is not one of the best things that language models can achieve. So nice things, also some risks, of course, right? So many of them we know. The issue of transparency and interpretability, especially in high-risk situations where we want to understand why a particular system behaves in a particular way. They can actually perform pretty badly. We are talking about stochastic systems. There is very little guarantee about their functioning. We need to just assume that every now and then they will fail, and sometimes they fail a lot. They can be used for malicious intents. Societal concerns, of course, we have a lot. We will discuss some of them later. So a lot to talk about, a lot to debate, a lot of ethical considerations to be brought to the fore and consider before we start implementing and deploying those systems. An example, in the process of discovering new drugs, where we again want to explore a very large molecular space to find compounds that are good as a medicine, one can simply invert the process and try to find toxic compounds, new poisons. And this can be done very effectively, right? It can be done in a matter of minutes. New, very, very, very poisonous substances can be discovered very quickly. We could be tempted to disengage from reality and from human interaction and simply rely on automation as a way to speed up our research. I'm finding more and more papers out there where we want to simulate people or simulate interaction as a way to avoid talking to other human beings and understanding what they want and what they need, which is actually pretty disturbing, right? If you ask me, right? We should talk more to people, not less. So we might actually look at the wrong problems to study, right? We can actually deviate ourselves farther away from human well-being and closer to something else. We might actually risk, and this is my concluding slide, to really lag behind, both in terms of what we can achieve, but in terms also of the outcomes that we achieve. So what I mean here is we are seeing that AI technology is a technology that is going to increase the difference between who can and who cannot. Right now, as Europe, we are dramatically behind in terms of computational capabilities with respect to the US or China. We are not independent. We have to rely on third-party infrastructures. We are not in control on our own research and R&D destiny. That's not necessarily nice, one will argue. AI will probably also have deep effects on the job market and or in, like in teams or even in education, but not for the reasons that we typically think about, that these jobs are going to be substituted. That's shenanigans. Look at the statistics, right? That's not happening. Mostly because we're going to ask a new type of capabilities of people that they don't have, right? The idea of continuous learning and training is going to be even more important in the future than it has been in the past. And inequalities. And this is maybe a pet peeve of mine, but I find it very unfair that, for instance, in a university, there are students that can afford to pay $20 per month for ChatGPT and get facilitated in their studies, and some don't, right? That's actually not a very balanced playing field. And that's also a risk, right? We can exacerbate and increase this gap. So that's it for my introduction. I'm actually looking forward for the debate today. Thank you very much again for being here, and I hope you enjoy. There's time for questions. I know there are time for questions, yes.
Anybody have questions?
We all want to listen to the debate. I think it's more interesting. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. Feel free to contact Alessandro, bother him as much as you want. He's always available, very busy, but always available. So we're actually up for the debate part. So does everybody know how the Oxford-style debate works? Yes and no, not really. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. This is a slim version of the Oxford-style debate. So basically, you have two debaters. One of them is going to debate for the affirmative, and one of them is going to debate for the negative. So basically, confirming or opposing the statement. Each debater has 5 minutes to pitch. So to give an introduction and to make sure that they bring their argument forward. After that, the other debater will pitch. Then you have 2 minutes for rebuttal. Rebuttal is just responding. So you expect to have somebody to respond to your statement. And then we have 1 minute as a final statement. So really the last push to conquer the argument, let's say. After that, we'll ask you to vote. So because you have the affirmative and the negative, you will vote. And it doesn't need to be mostly about your opinion. It's mostly about how do you think the person argued. So keep this in mind. So green is for the affirmative, and blue is for the negative. Can you all show me the green and the blue? Yes, it works. Okay, cool. Then, where did I leave this? Okay. Then we can start. We have 3 statements, and each of them is about the use of AI and the consequences, or what does it mean. So they're all like pretty interesting statements, and they're written in a way that it's very polarizing, meaning that, of course, it's a little bit extreme in the way it's written down. So bear with us with that. And about the type of debate, you have to keep in mind that the person who's arguing is not sharing their opinion necessarily, is just arguing pro or con the statement. So whatever you're gonna hear today, it's not somebody's opinion. So I think we're ready to go. Yes? So I'm gonna call Aarong Ding and Jonne Maas. The affirmative here and the negative there, please.
So test.
I'm gonna keep the time, and I raise my arm when you're 4 minutes up. So we still have 1 minute. Somebody has questions about the structure of the debate? Okay, you'll figure it out in a minute.
Okay, thanks a lot. Welcome everyone to come to this debate field. I think I'm the guinea pigs for today, so let me just show you how things will go. And actually, I'm from Cambridge, so this is actually the style from the other university. But yeah, let's bear with it. So today, we are going to argue about one of the interesting statements called researchers. Why should we pay attention or not pay attention to using AI responsibly and sustainably because of the consequence they are going to actually raise in the end. So I have a question actually at the beginning for everyone. So anybody in the room, after being warmed up by Alessandro, so have you everyone ever heard of things, AI-backed things like TikTok, Instagram, or even used them? If you have never done that, raise your hand. Okay, yeah, so it looks like everybody actually here has actually been, somehow engaged or even played with AI. So that's actually put everything on this very good starting point. So what do we mean by AI responsibly and sustainably? Honestly speaking, those are very, I would say, academia kind of driven text. Let me give you an example. Look at the pictures behind those two very academic keywords. So one of the things actually regarding AI is that I have actually heard just a few months ago, one of the keynote talk in ICT Open at NWO is that, have you ever know that if you are nowadays playing with your TikTok, Instagram, generating 1 minute of AI video, do you know how much that actually equals to the energy and the resource consumption? So I can tell you one example. It's not just, fancy numbers. 1 minute AI video nowadays is more like 36 hours PlayStation play. So it's about 1 minute, 1.5 days video playing non-stop. So anybody here can play video games for 1.5 days without stop? Right, this is about 1 minute. So this is actually one of the things, behind this kind of very cryptic academic words, responsibly, sustainably, using AI, that we have to actually be really aware. So in addition to this example, I can tell you even more kind of one step ahead. Nowadays, we have ChatGPT, we have these GPUs kind of going up crazily. And nowadays, actually, even a few months ago, Wall Street actually released a report telling everybody actually in the industry, data centers bigger than this library has been built all the time, but now we have problems because we actually do not have enough resources, silicons, chips, and all the other things and the power supply to support the growth of the AI. So that's actually one of the critical problems that, if we really turn a blind eyes on this resource consumption side of the story, we are actually going to leading us into a very bad result. Okay, yeah, before we close actually the debate, let's actually look at the critical subject of this whole thing. So we talk about the researchers here. And then all the things you heard about it, I'm more kind of talking about consumers. So now if you actually wonder what the researchers do in this whole game, researchers in the academia, in the industry, and also in the public government, public sectors, are the ones actually not just using AI, but the ones design, develop, but also at the same time, part of the game using AI. So it's actually a full loop. And that's why actually, for the sort of like whole pipeline spectrum controller, the role that the researchers have in this game, they cannot neglect all the critical consequences of the whole AI in using them in their work. So that's close my talk for today.
Sorry, okay, yeah. Can everyone hear me? All right, perfect. So, thank you. I obviously disagree with you. So the statement, researchers who fail to use AI responsibly and sustainably are turning a blind eye to the pollution and resource depletion caused by their work. So I have a problem with this statement. And my problem lies in the moral wrong implicit in turning the blind eye. The statement unfairly loads the dice against the researchers and expects too much of them. So before I elaborate on this, let me first say what I do agree with. So it is an indisputable fact, as Aaron has just shown, that the use of AI systems require extensive energy resources and usages. Specifically, the more advanced generative AI systems like ChatGPT require a lot of energy usage when they are trained, or also when we use them for prompts. They require water for the data centers to cool down, etc. So pollution and resource depletion is this a relevant concern. And because of these more significant climate concerns in the case of these more advanced generative AI systems, this will also be my focus. And so with researchers, I have in mind those people who use ChatGPT and other generative AI systems whenever they use it to require information. And so that ranges from PhDs, postdocs, assistant professors, full professors, but also students using ChatGPT for their own research. With the training of the model, of course, so whenever they use it for prompts, that of course requires energy. So whenever they use it, whether they like it or not, they become part and parcel of the chain of this pollution. I agree with all of this. And so it seems logical then to say that these researchers have a responsibility to use the AI system responsibly and sustainably because of these energy sources. And so when they don't, they are turning a blind eye to these consequences. And it is with this turning the blind eye that I think is a problem. Failing to use AI responsibly and sustainably does not necessarily entail turning a blind eye. Turning a blind eye implies a morally objectionable action. Someone who turns a blind eye is doing something morally bad. And so the statement that researchers who fail to use AI responsibly are doing so is therefore morally laden. It implies that researchers who do not do this are doing something that is morally objectionable. I find this too strong and asking too much of researchers, and I have two reasons for this. First, someone who turns a blind eye is as the definition of turning a blind eye goes, ignoring undesirable information. And in order to ignore such information, one must be aware of this information in the first place. And so they must be in the position to ignore this information, right, to be aware. But I don't think that necessarily every researcher is aware of the environmental harms of AI systems. Only recently has the field itself, the field of AI ethics, picked up on the environmental harms. And up until a few years ago, the focus has primarily been on other societal concerns, such as discriminatory biases. Whenever researchers fail to use AI responsibly and sustainable, I believe it is too strong of a commitment to say they are turning a blind eye. They simply might not be aware of the consequences. And that leads me to my second point, namely whether researchers should be aware of these consequences. I believe requiring researchers to be aware of such consequences is also too demanding. Although information about the environmental harms of AI systems is well discussed online, it does require an active search. This is unlike, for instance, when you buy eggs in the supermarket, where you see a certification or an indication whether these eggs were raised in a cage or whether they were able to roam about the farm freely. And so in that sense, it is different because where the eggs have a certain certification, AI systems don't have any indication about their responsible and sustainable development. And so environmental costly AI systems like ChatGPT do not have an indication. And when we ask of researchers that they should be aware of these environmental consequences, we put all responsibility on the researchers and not enough on the people developing these systems. The people developing the systems who can design sustainable AI systems. We don't put enough responsibility on the legislators, the people who can demand sustainable made AI systems. And so with this statement, it is unbalanced when it comes down to distributing responsibility amongst various relevant stakeholders. This is simply unfair. So to sum up, can I? Oh, so yeah, that's my, okay.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate, first of all, that you actually in your debates agreeing that actually there is actually a unawareness and also the acknowledgement that you actually also give to this statement is that researchers actually doing this because they might actually be unaware of that. But then that's actually one of the things I actually have been also puzzling in the many years of research in this domain. So I think people, if you are aware of in this AI ICT domain, there is a saying, maybe coming from the West Coast in the California style, people say, move fast, break things. And then, after that, things evolve, awareness will come. And then we actually, that is actually the problem actually nowadays, leading us into actually some of the negative consequences we're having now. And then this is actually one of the things I want to first point out. Awareness and definition of turning a blind eye on the consequences, they are related, but they are not exactly the same thing. So researchers, as you say, are categorized as many the users and also maybe the designer for AI. But in your statement, you also mentioned that researchers actually not developing AI. But that is actually the point I cannot agree. So as I already mentioned in my statements, researchers actually are the ones actually doing many things. So I think this is a misconception of many people about the definition of researchers. So we have researchers in industry labs, in Nokia, in AI, Google companies, Microsoft. And we have people working in the government, public sectors. They have research jobs, duties. And this is actually a kind of a larger scheme that actually we should not actually confuse ourselves, because researchers, by its meaning, is not somebody actually lock ourselves up in the library and just writing stuff on formula on the paper. Nowadays, researchers actually are having more responsibility, having more kind of involvement in the whole AI development, design, usage, and also they are actually also the ones who should be very much up to date and aware all the consequences they may have. So turning a blind eye on that, I believe that's actually really a critical concern, and they should not fail to do that.
All right. Yes, indeed. I do agree that researchers cannot just be narrowed down to the users. However, it says researchers who fail to use AI responsibly and sustainably. So this is where the focus on actually using these systems responsibly and sustainable comes from. Once we start talking about the development, of course, that's a different question. But then also the statement would change to researchers who fail to develop AI responsibly and sustainably, which is maybe a bit of a sneaky philosophical way of approaching things, but unfortunately, philosophy. Also, the point mainly is that I, in that sense, agree with you that it shouldn't just be on the people that are using it, but very much also on the people that are behind the system. I think the responsibility should not just merely fall on the people that are actively using these systems. It should not just fall on them to calculate whenever it is responsibly enough or sustainable enough. And so there, I think there is actually a very strong moral duty for those that are standing behind the development and the deployment, as well as the regulators and legislators, to focus on the more sustainable and responsible approach to AI systems, to the entire life cycle, not just to the use. So in that sense also, I think here we can work on expanding what we mean with responsible and sustainability more broadly already from the get-go. I think, I don't know how long I have left. 20 seconds. 20 seconds, yeah. I think before I start off on a new rant, I think I will just leave it with that. And just point out that it is, of course, true that there are these consequences, but just want to emphasize that the moral responsibility requires a fair distribution. So, yeah, thanks.
All right, so I think everybody actually in the room, thank you for staying with us for so many minutes. I think as a researchers, myself, and now I'm talking about researchers. So even if without considering researchers, as you said, not as a designer, developer, but even just as a user. So you heard me actually already talking about 1 minute AI video is about 1.5 days. So imagine that's 10 minutes. That's about 15 days. 1.5 a month. Non-stop, doing things non-stoply. So imagine that if everybody here in the room, we actually do this, I believe some of you are researchers, if we use AI in that manner, can you imagine what is the consequences and the critical results we are going to face? So with that actually being in the mind, I firmly believe researchers should not turn the blind eyes on the critical consequences of resource depletion and potential pollution, even when using AI. And we should be doing that responsibly and sustainably. Thank you.
Yeah, so my final statement will be what I had at the end of the previous 5 minutes, so that's perfect. So the statement, researchers who fail to use AI responsibly and sustainably are turning a blind eye to the pollution and resource depletion caused by the work, I think is a flawed statement. It loads the dice that failing to use AI responsibly and sustainably is morally objectionable, yet this is unfair as it requires too much knowledge from researchers that they may not have, and more importantly, that they should not be expected to seek themselves. So here we should really very much strongly focus on looking to distribute responsibility in a fair way across the entire life cycle of an AI system. With that, thank you all very much.
It's time to vote. So, are you going to vote? Have you been convinced by the negative or by the affirmative for your vote? That's difficult. So, blue is the negative, green is the affirmative. Okay, time to vote. What do you think? Oh my God, it's fair. It's fair. It's fair. Okay, congratulations. Thank you. Thank you so much. Are you ready for the second statement? Okay, so the second statement is namely about ChatGPT. I'm going to read your proposal is entirely justified. What matters is the commitment to follow through, not the method of writing. I think this is very, very, very itchy. Okay, then I'll leave it to Martinsen and Marcell Varkonyi.
Is this already switched on? Yeah. Is time running? Hi everyone, I'm really grateful to be here and argue in the affirmative of the motion using ChatGPT to write an entire proposal is entirely justified. What matters is the commitment to follow through, not the method of writing. So there are three points that I want to bring across in my little justification of that statement. The first is that I think what repels us here a little is the idea that science, that when we look into science, when we credit and reward scientists for the work they do, we have a misleading idea of agency in scientific practice. Most of the things, as I'm going to argue, that we credit scientists for is not within their control, is not actually their doing. The circumstances under which they operate is not of their choosing, and I'm going to give you an example in a minute. Perhaps another thing that rebels us here is what Alessandro said before is a problem of equality, namely that some institutions will have access to the technologies that generate proposals, scientific proposals, while others do not. Well, that inequality already exists. It is access to valorization centers and to good supervision personnel that is already unequally distributed. So if at all, the technologies would only add to that, but it doesn't mean that it eradicates them. And I think that what is it that we value most about science? It's the product. What is valuable about science is not how scientific ideas came about, but what they do for society. This is what we have to keep in mind. So let me expose a bit on the first point. I've written in a book that, and my own contribution to a book that is called Serendipity Science, about the case of Edward Jenner. Edward Jenner, as many of you know, since the 70s, mankind has managed to eradicate for the first time ever a deadly virus, that is the smallpox. Edward Jenner is the Englishman in the 18th century who is universally hailed for having discovered what is now known as vaccination. The procedure that you infect a person with a virus that is from a similar family than the virus that you want to protect the person against, and the person develops the antibodies then to effectively combat the virus that you want to prevent it from getting. Now, for this genuine scientific contribution that he made, he has a statue in Hyde Park. How did Edward Jenner came to have this idea? We might think, well, he's a genius thinking about this relationship. The fact is that Jenner, when he was in his early 20s, came across a rumor that was already widely circulated at the time where he was operating, namely the rumor that milkmaids who were milking cows could not contract smallpox anymore because they had already contracted cowpox. He came across the rumor. The only thing he did, it was not his idea, therefore, to make this into a productive scientific finding. The only thing he did was pick up on that rumor and make it into, and test it scientifically, and that is what has now become the practice of vaccination. Why would we hail Jenner for that if it wasn't actually his idea? So his contribution to scientific progress in medicine was already minimal. And a lot of other people, after he tested this practice, made additional contributions to them. We should get rid of the idea that scientists if they at all make genuine intellectual contributions to scientific progress, these are very minimal. So let's just take this a step further and assume that ChatGPT could be these idea generations that we already pick out and are outside of our control in our environment. ChatGPT could be the rumors in the dairies that Edward Jenner picked up for us in modern times. And let's instrumentalize this source of hypothesis and idea generation and see what current scientists, how they can build up on it, rather than rejecting it and therefore miss out on an opportunity to have valuable scientific impacts for society. This is what really matters, I think. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Well, first of all, thank you, Martin. I was very intently listening to your arguments, to which I will respond in a few minutes. But first, my own arguments. Well, I will be arguing for the negative. I actually disagree with this statement, and I will be presenting three different perspectives to you. The first one will be the question of utility or usefulness. The second, perspective of values. And the third, I will also bring attention to what I consider an arbitrary distinction between proposal writing and carrying out research. So first, the question of utility. I believe it's useful to first understand a little bit the basic of how such a tool as ChatGPT operates. It is a probabilistic language model, which means that it basically always predicts the very next word. This also means that ChatGPT is capable of recombining existing information in novel ways. However, it is not capable of generating genuinely novel insights, discover new facts, or ask new questions. And I do consider asking new questions a crucial part of writing a proposal. So therefore, I actually consider ChatGPT unfit to write a research proposal entirely. Now, the second point is about values. I would like to highlight three values that are considered values that are considered key by TU Delft's key of conduct. And I think we all uphold these values overall in the academic community. The first is that of diversity. So the way everyone sees the world, every single person, they each experience and see the world in a unique way. The same cannot be said of AI, as it is simply an accumulation of information summarized in the most probabilistic way. So, as long as it's only one person using ChatGPT to write an entire proposal, we do not really run into issues. However, if every single researcher starts using ChatGPT to write an entire proposal, then suddenly we have a massive reduction of perspectives. Then, societal engagement is another key value that TU Delft stands for. So, while using AI could potentially speed up research and thus increase societal engagement and impact, the AI bias presents a significant risk. AI bias entails systematically favoring or disadvantaging certain groups over others along different attributes, such as ethnicity or age or socioeconomic status. So I would also argue that if you use ChatGPT to write a proposal, you are actually putting the research at risk of this bias. Then, the third value that I would like to highlight is integrity. In order to act with academic integrity, one needs to make it transparent in the proposal that it is written by ChatGPT. Well, if one does that, this raises serious questions about whether a researcher can claim full ownership or not to the research. And if the proposal gets accepted, then does that also mean that the grant partially or fully belongs to OpenAI, the company that owns ChatGPT? problematic question. And the last point, very briefly, I do believe that writing a proposal actually is not something that precedes carrying out research. I believe that actually it is the first stage of writing a research, where very important ideas are laid down that later on define the research that you carry out if your proposal gets accepted. I think my time is up, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcell. This was a very resourceful defense of the negative of the statement. I'm still not fully convinced that you have made a persuasive argument here. I can tell you what I do when I'm stuck with my own research. I do have a library, not quite as big as this one, but when I'm stuck with research, I basically introduce something that is very akin to the randomness that ChatGPT can simulate. I turn around and I pick out of my library randomly a book and start reading. Usually when I do that, I get unstuck with the thoughts that I have and I get new ideas. I think that is the way in which ChatGPT can in fact challenge bias and make us unstuck from the idea that we are currently working on, instead of triggering us to stay within the framework that we want to work on. The argument continues, I believe, in that we should rethink in how many funding agencies currently demand proposals to be written because they want to be written based so that it's going to get a consistent storyline of the research that the researcher has been done before, that he or she should carry on in the future. I think we should get away from that as well, because it also keeps us hidden or kept in a trajectory that we want to break out of. So in short, I'm not convinced that we can distill the agency that you so much want to protect. I think we have to give it up, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin, for your reaction. And you're talking about agency, both in your pitch and then now reacting to me. And actually, I'm not sure if I disagree with you about the agency part. I think you're raising very interesting questions about even, if you go a bit higher, the question of free will in a way. I would not necessarily, I don't think that one needs to go into the territory to answer the question. I think the question is not about who should be credited with for instance, something that they discover, such as in your story about Edward Jenner, and nor is it about, now let's stick to that. Just because it is uncertain who should be credited with something that they discover, that doesn't mean that ChatGPT actually is capable of writing a proposal. So I don't disagree with the fact that information flows in complex ways and then somebody picks it up and then actually makes something out of it. Sure. And I agree with that. But that I don't think that refutes the point about ChatGPT's incapability of functioning, of replacing a human being with their creativity, with their perceptiveness, with their sensitivity towards their environment. Research, I think, is something that should actually be rooted in community. It's another issue. You were talking about funding proposals. I think that's another issue of academia. It's often too detached research. We need to come closer to the community, and ChatGPT cannot do that, I think.
It's a bit quieter. But the final statement is an invitation to the audience to really be clear about what is it that we value about science. Is it where science comes from and who has generated it, or what it does for society? And I think what it does for society, if it's true, the effects it can have, the productivity it can have of this new discoveries, new technologies, and new scientific insights, it can have wherever it comes from. So ChatGPT can just be one of the sources that we employ to generate new knowledge.
So, in my closing statement, again, I actually have to return to the point that I don't disagree with you. I think ChatGPT can be useful in moving ahead with science, but the question, how do we use ChatGPT to do that, I think is very, very crucial. You mentioned values yourself in the closing statement. Well, I happen to find values very important, especially those that I mentioned, integrity, diversity, and societal engagement. And I believe if we are to abide by these three values, I think I could not hand ChatGPT the writing of an entire proposal for a research that I'm going to do possibly for years, actually. Imagine that ChatGPT defines for you what you're going to do for years if your proposal gets accepted. I would rather not go down that line. And I would not want you to go down that line either. But everyone is free to decide. So I guess we'll use the colored papers. Thank you very much.
Okay. Is it working? Yes. So thank you so much, guys. This has been an interesting conversation. I'm not sure I have an answer. So let's ask everybody. So blue for the negative and green for the affirmative. How do you feel? What do you guys think? Yeah. It's kind of a tie. You're not convincing anybody, huh? It's like both of you, literally.
We're both convincing a lot of people.
Yeah, possibly. Ah, that makes sense. Do you want to give it a try for the last one? Yeah? Yeah? I can ask you before.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm very much illuminated by these sentences. Even though I still believe that I'm right.
So let's go to the last statement. And this time, let's say we do as Martin suggested. We're going to vote first and after. So the statement is, people tend to consider the final cost of AI models, but need to consider the consequences of human lifestyle and the damage it does even after the model is deployed. And we have Curtis Sharma and Karin Bogdanova. So do we want to start voting? Blue for the negative, green for the affirmative. Okay. Let's take a mental picture of it. Okay, interesting.
All right, thank you very much for inviting to debate, and I'm looking at you, blue people, at your previous experience with life. But hopefully, I will convince you otherwise, and the green people would convince you even more. So AI is now everywhere. It is unavoidable. It is deeply embedded in our everyday actions, big and small. And rather than simply affecting all areas of our life, it is now fully reinterpreting and reinventing processes, institutions, products, services, and human values. AI, of course, is not a natural phenomenon, doesn't exist on its own. Its design is defined by people and by companies' visions and ambitions. Meanwhile, as the statement suggests, when the decisions are made regarding which AI models should be developed and how, what is taken into considerations primarily is the financial infrastructural costs, that is, whether there are resources to do the AI model. The position at its core implies that if it can be made technically, it should be made. What I'm arguing here in support of is that this development process needs to get much more aware and involved in the social world it is currently embedded in, rather than being driven by sci-fi imaginaries, profits, and innovation race. That means understanding AI products and services as part of a broad socio-technical system, strategizing in which ways AI transforms existing systems, and attempting to, at the very least, involve the public conversation, these consequences before products and systems are launched, and aligning the technology with the reality on the ground. Today, I want to give 2 reasons for it. First of all, it isn't naive to assume that AI companies are not aware of the social, ethical, and political implications they allegedly do and can do, at least on a surface level. The proof of it is both hiring ethics researchers and firing them. But instead of meaningfully understanding which processes will AI really transform and which groups of people will it affect, they first create a new problem or frame a problem differently, come up with a metric, and then suggest an AI solution to make the number change. For instance, do you know what metric AI companies suggest to measure the success of wildlife conservation? Amount of poachers arrested or neutralized. That is, people who illegally hunt, who are often indigenous people, arrested or killed. Is that a relevant metric? Sure. Should the whole of conservation, wildlife conservation program success be defined by this metric just because it's countable and measurable? Or taking kind of more common experience, generative AI, was creativity really at risk and really needed democratizing, as the OpenAI suggest, and the art tools being so inaccessible that this is what we have now? So including the consideration of post-deployment and planning for and researching them can make this consequence more tangible, pragmatic, and actionable, rather than allowing AI companies of ethics washing and evading responsibility and accountability in defining and addressing the real problems that exist. And secondly, while those are very much moral, ethical, and legal concerns, not implementing in any way the social and political aspects of technology into their design is simply bad design. And technology with a bad design is a bad technology, is it not? They do not. So what does that tell us about the companies that make them, make the AI models? They do not understand their existing and potential users and their needs. They don't understand the context, systems, and processes their tool is supposed to intervene and transform. They do not understand what their technology is doing and what it's capable of doing. Or it might be that they prefer not to know, and again, avoid responsibility, including a legal one. So my final point is this. The intended and non-intended social political consequences are inherent in the design and deployment of AI models. Pretending they don't exist means you're creating a technology in a vacuum, a technology without a user. It is then not about considering social consequences on human lifestyle and the damages, but making good technology that exists in and belong to the real world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karin, for that very impassioned point made. So I think there are 2 things I can say here to start with. One is that the overwhelming show of green cards kind of suggests that people already know a lot about this, that things should be done after the model is employed. So that's kind of contrary to what the statement is suggesting. That, The second thing is, I think that Karin made a lot of points about what should be done before a model is deployed. And I agree with a lot of those points because they affect the human, there's a human cost that should be thought about before the model is deployed. So thank you for that. That supports a lot of what I will say. So I want to talk about 2 main things. So my argument against this is mainly about the before and the after of when something is deployed, because obviously human costs must be considered on both ends. And I think there's not enough said about what happens before a model is deployed and what happens in the development of a model. I'm going to talk about 2 human costs. One is, of course, direct human cost, which when we talk about You have people who are employed, for instance, as as data labels all across the world, particularly in the global south, Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, who are basically working in a sort of a high-tech version of a sweatshop, being paid less than minimum wage, less than poverty level wages, in order to label data that go into the production of AI models. The other thing is you have people labeling data that they're not familiar with. Someone in some country in Africa or Southeast Asia labeling data on something that's happening in Europe, and they don't know. That is another aspect of the human cost of producing an AI model. The second one has been touched on a bit before, which is the environmental effect. Now, a lot of people talk about the environment as if it's something that's separate from us, but we are the environment. And when you create a model, for instance, creating a large language model, which emits something like 300,000 kilograms of carbon into the air, that is affecting us. That's a human cost as well. That is going into production of the model. When setting up and running labs to create models deplete the water supply for an entire community, that is the human cost that goes into creating a model, all of which happens before the model is deployed. So I think when we say that the final cost of models is considered, that's not really true. And I think the hidden cost of developing AI models is definitely the part that's not considered. People, they don't think about it, they don't see it, it's far away, and they think about, wow, the model is here, this is exciting, what can I do with this? But the fact of what happens before that, what goes into creating the model, that cost to humans and all of us is the part that is not really considered. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. As you kind of fairly noticed, there's two elements of it. Kind of just very kind of the social aspects and kind of just personal and collective, and the kind of where this kind of implications, considerations should be considered, right, during the development or after deployment. But what I have been arguing about. So you're talking, for instance, about the invisible, invisible labor that often happens. But sometimes, right? So you're saying kind of right that this is happens post-deployment. Rather, like this is the consideration of during deployment, but it's also the consequences of post-deployment as well. So for instance, the content moderators, they keep working. It's not about the kind of the model. It is the way how it's designed that is also reflected on how it continues to be being maintained. Right, so kind of in my position, the way kind of embedding the design of AI model into the social world requires both understanding what are you doing and how it's going to be reflected post-deployment. You cannot just kind of sit in a room together, just defining right whether kind of it's a good kind of business solution and whether it's kind of can be somewhat fit into the ethical standards. But instead, it's be truly rooted in how other systems work together, and how does this technology will further kind of being domesticated. And for that, it requires both research prior to it and understanding the feedback that comes after it. And for this, we require this kind of public conversation, kind of putting AI companies for being responsible and accountable for that, and just putting the focus on the pre-deployment, the pre-deployment and development is just not enough, and it's not considerate of a systematic quality of AI models.
So I agree with you that after a model is deployed, it must be monitored. It's a huge amount of work that needs to be going into monitoring how things are used and how it affects human beings. But what I'm disagreeing with is that the statement that there's focus before this and there's no focus after this. For me, it is the opposite, because there's a lot of focus in this part. There's no focus on the part before the model is deployed. That's what people don't know. We know a lot about this. And I completely agree with you that we need to monitor it and companies need to change. But what I'm arguing against is that there's also a consideration of what happens before. There is not. That is invisible. And that's where we all need to put some more attention, because you already have attention here. It shouldn't stop, but we don't have any attention on the invisible part, which happens before the model is deployed. That is what I'm arguing against. Thank you.
All right, so I think our discussions, again, kind of 2 points that kind of we argued around is that kind of we agree on the social, social consequences and implications have to be acknowledged at all. No, not at all times. Social consequences should be acknowledged, but it's the matter if it comes at the point of development or also including the post-deployment. But again, as I mentioned, kind of during my kind of opening speech, is that we have to take the things systematically, and the way how AI is imagined and designed by the companies is not how people are actually using it in the end. And understanding what kind of consequences are happening that are unintended, that are always there, needs to be included. In the overall kind of business program of the companies, that the monitoring and adjusting, aligning post-deployment is important, both in touching upon the hidden labor and also in other harms and damages that are social, personal, and political.
Thank you. So going back to what Alessandro said at the beginning, of course, AI is a tool that's very useful for all of us. It's a great tool to have if it's used in the right way. The fear I have with AI is that it will entrench and deepen inequalities. And we can't wait until something is deployed to start scrutinizing it. We have to hold the process in developing AI models to account just as much as to when it's after it's deployed. And I would like you guys to look at something, two people working in this area. One of them is Professor Mark Graham at Oxford, and the other one is Kate Crawford, who talks about these kind of things. So please have a look at them. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Are you ready for voting? So blue is the negative and green is the affirmative. Okay. Look, that's nice. Wow. Thank you so much, both of you. So I hope you had fun as much as I did. We're going to have half an hour break in which I'll encourage you to have a chat with each other, grab a coffee, and sign up. That's what I was forgetting. Sign up to become a member of Open Science Community Delft, but also 4TU ResearchData. We're going to have Nicolas Dinster, data stewards at TPM, to discuss about licenses and the sense of ownership in academia. Nicolas?
Yes. Oh, I can. Hello. And I can click. Cool. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I wasn't quite sure what to expect as a crowd, so we'll make do with all you good people. And the idea was to try to ask you a few questions, actually. Try to see how you fit with AI and data nowadays. So because what's been happening is that because we publish everything open, and you've been asked very kindly, well, not you, because it's mostly support staff here, but researchers have been asked kindly to drop their paper under Creative Commons licenses, make it available for everyone, and we've done the same with data. And then we engage into AI, which is typically the type of stuff that require massive amount of information. So we made everything available for free, basically, under license, of course. So what does that mean? And I wanted to start with a kind of ask you for your opinion on one specific case. You can go through this if you want, but the basic idea is some big university somewhere in the world. I pick Marrakesh University as an example because it's big and it's far away and you don't know much about it. And that's exactly what I wanted you to think. A big university that exists, you don't really know what they're doing, but you know they're there and they're doing good scientific research. They've harvested all the research paper from the world that they could find in order to build their ChatGPT for researchers. That was their aim. And somehow, let's start with what they gave back to the world, because they took everything, but they gave stuff back. They gave their model back, the trained model. They gave all the tools that they used to harvest the paper, create the model, and all the good stuff. And they even have a cool app where you can chat with the outcome. So they provide you, for free, you have the chatbot. Somehow you play with it, and you figure out 100% sure that your paper was absorbed by them. They harvested your work. You know your work was under a CC BY license. So you say, well, those guys, they should have cited me, right? My paper was CC BY, you do something with it, you tell me. So you start searching for information about who cited who, and you find nothing. Your paper is not cited. There was no reference on their website, in their own publication, in their data set. Nothing is talking about the hundreds of thousands of paper they've harvested. And the question for you is, how much do you care? Is it a big problem for you, or it is kind of a small problem? Would you go up in arms and say, no, you violated my rights, dear university from far away that I don't know, and I would like to fight back? Or do you say, well, you know what, it's breaching license, that's no ideal, but fair enough. I mean, that's stuff that happens. So in such a situation, if you think that this is something they should be allowed to do, it's unfortunate they broke license, then that's fine. You go green. Fine, go ahead, harvest my data, my papers, don't cite me. That's really unfortunate, but I'm willing to close my eyes. Or I found this great. Just go for it. You go green. If you think that they should have cited you, like somehow it was up to them to do an effort here, and they didn't, and it's kind of a problem, you go blue. Kind of a problem, you go blue. Kind of you don't care, you go green. We've got kind of like Santosh is playing around with having multiple things. You're kind of confused as well. So could I get the kind of the rationale from someone who said that's no good? I can see at the back you had a very strong opinion. You raised your post-it almost immediately. So tell us, please.
My philosophy is that you should be as open as possible and as sharing as possible, but it's so necessary to be cited on it and to be credited for it. So citation is key, I guess.
For recognition and rewards as well, right? People should be recognized for the work that they do. That's it.
I'm also thinking of it about this selfishly as a reader. It's like I want to know the original source. So if I choose to go back to it and read the source text that informed all the rest of the other texts, I think I should have the ability to do that. We get thrown so many facts nowadays. I think it's hard to know what to trust. And unless you know what the source is, how can you possibly know if you should believe it or not?
Well, I think those are very reasonable reasons. Someone who you didn't care too much. Yeah. Like, what was your ID?
Well, I think with the era of data and information, it's mostly possible to someone loses your work, or sort of uses your work and not cite. I mean, it happened a lot to me that I started to say, well, whatever, this is what it is. Even if I complain, nothing would be changed. So I don't care much about it. And yeah, I mean, that's my reason. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Santosh, you were kind of confused. Do you mind telling us, like, because you played the two cards, that's totally cheating?
So for me, the question is the nature of the response that the chat GPT, whatever it is, and what is it? So if somebody is like, hey, give me some idea or give me summary of some research, and it gave that not being cited, maybe, but if this were to be then used forward, so essentially somebody who were to work on top of that, right? And then if the credit is not given because you're essentially taking what this ChatGPT is telling you about this research and then moving on from it, I think then that would definitely be a problem. So it's about the thing of, for example, I might read something on Wikipedia. I'm probably not going to go down and check the references all the time, though people do reference and do it, right? So at the Wikipedia level, the referencing is good and important, but it's not the thing that I'm too worried about. It's when I build upon top of the Wikipedia thing that it matters that I reference and do everything correctly. I apply the same standard here. So if it's something going to be built on top, then yes, do reference it. But if you're just getting like a quick snapshot as a read, then I don't think that's too much of a big deal.
All right. I obviously don't really have an answer. Otherwise, I wouldn't ask the question. But for a scientific paper, I think I would be interested to have the opinion of researcher, like how close do they feel to their own work? Or do they think that as soon as they've published it on the CC BY and it's accessible to the world, maybe they kind of stop caring? And like they would love to be cited, that's good practice, that's what we ask. But occasionally when it's done on, maybe it's not a massive problem for them. However, I know that whenever plagiarism happens or whenever the papers are translated in a different language to be republished, then that's an issue for sure, and people get really, really upset. But for the reuse of scientific paper, I was kind of curious to see where you stood. And I'm curious to know what the position of researcher about that as well. So then I take the same idea, and I suspect like your answer are probably not going to change that much. But what if it's not the paper, but data that you've produced? Would that change? Are you more okay with people violating stuff when it's about papers or when it's about data? So they just took some of your data and you figure it out as well. Somehow you're 100% sure that part of a data set that you've published as part of your own work has been reused to create an AI system. And same kind of idea, pure research project and kind of a chatbot type of things. So somehow you figured out your data is in there, you know that it's a fact. How angry are you? Is it kind of okay or is it not? Is it better if it's data than if it's paper? Let's consider data and code together again. Like it's a big bunch. We're not going to care about this difference. So green post-it, if you think that reusing data that was released under CC BY license not getting cited is awkward but kind of okay. Or you go blue if that's not supposed to happen. All right, like you went green for the paper. You're not happy with the data. So what's the difference between the data and the paper?
I think for the data, especially in my domain, I have to do a lot of lab works and I have to collect the data, and it costs a lot of time for me. It costs a lot of studying to understand what is the instrument. It costs even my health because I have to work with X-ray. So I'm not happy with it, first of all. And second of all, if I'm having a data set, or let's say if I want to use an instrument which is not allowed, I'm not allowed to use it because I'm from Iran, I'm under sanction, and I have to share it, I will be like, no, I'm also not going to share it because I'm not allowed to use your instrument, so in return, I'm not going to share my data. It's like I told this story before. It's like Pepsi and Coca-Cola story. Whenever they decide to make their formula open access, I'm going to make my data set open access. So.
Jan? Yeah.
I also turned from green to blue for paper and data, because I feel for paper, especially if you're a chatbot, then you ask for more knowledge and information contained or delivered by the paper. So that's very different. Like Santosh said, maybe someone just want to get an overview of something and there's better understanding of things. But data usually, or code is more specific, and that it's not easily understood by normal people, or then basically, if someone reuses it for a specific purpose, and for that, I think is indeed a reward recognition. That rule need to be better applied there. So,
right. I'm wondering whether a researcher would, because you talk about workload and how much time you spend preparing the data. I wonder how a researcher would feel about that, because they spend a lot of time working on the paper as well. Just the typesetting is something that's going to take a couple of hours. All right, so data is kind of, I haven't seen any green. Everyone disagree with the idea that you put there, kind of on the fence. So where do you place the threshold? Or we could just shout. Not that many.
My voice is loud enough. For me, I think it essentially reflects somewhat the same thing as from the paper. One, again, I think I would move maybe slightly more towards the blue end in terms of, objection in terms of for the data, but mostly because of ultimately, what are you building on top of it? If it is just ChatGPT version of this giving, I don't know, sample data, hey, this is what they have, or like a play graph, whatever, that's one thing. But if you're going to build something on top of it, right, that's a different conversation, right? Again, it's about what are you ultimately using it for, and what is the utility there, right? If it is some sort of digesting of knowledge and translating it for a little bit of easier access, I think that's fine. You know, we do that, I mean, all the time. The other question, of course, is what do you mean by citation for both the papers and the data? Is it the idea that when you have a conversation with the LLM is supposed to say, hey, by the way, this data that I have, or what I presented, was based on this? Is that something we want to have? And I don't know that that is not possible. I know, for example, that ChatGPT LLM, they actually made it a point to not to do that, to say do some sort of privacy preservation and things like that. So maybe what you're saying could actually be done. So if that, in that case, then maybe that's a different practice that we want to implement.
That's actually an interesting point. I wasn't really thinking about the chatbot mentioning your name or like producing your citation in a proper format as you were using the tool. I was thinking about citation on the website or any kind of external references that would be outside of the tool, because that's what we tend to do. We tend to do that with paper. The references are at the end. You have a small note somewhere. But I guess the challenge with those systems is that because you're harvesting tons of data, keeping track of where you got it, we're supposed to have a kind of machine-readable license information. I think 4TU does that. You can retrieve it through API. So if someone were to harvest the information from 4TU, they would be able to know what license it was under and whether they need to have a citation or not. And that can be automated. If you harvest paper from Scopus, I'm not sure you get the license information from them on the paper. That's going to be tougher. So AI systems, they're kind of interesting because they invite this kind of bulk processing of downloading of data, and whether you're going to check or not the quality of the stuff you got, well, that's well, you should cite them, apparently. Like most people agree. If you play with data, citation is not negotiable. What if it's the same, but it's not a university? This time it's Google, and they're making a product out of your work. Like, is that okay or not? And maybe they cite you, or maybe they don't. Because I guess right now Google can do that. If we produce information on CC BY, what prevents them from harvesting everything? They just have to cite you. That's what we said. That was the commitment. So if Google doesn't cite your data, it's a bit silly to ask you the question. I know you're going to say no. You were already kind of on the fence when it's researcher. I fail to see how you would suddenly agree if it's about to create a commercial product and you're not going to get a cut out of it. So that's going to be no. But I was wondering if there was any difference in our perception of how angry do we want to be or how protective of our material and our license, if it makes a difference, whether it's about academia or commercial partners. I'm not going to ask you to play with post-its. I know you're going to say no. Google should cite you for sure. But yeah. Well, that raises an excellent question, because I'm not quite sure how we follow up on the reuse of our material and who checked if the license were abided to, that one. So there's a question of like people reuse the material. How do we know? How do we check? Considering what happened with translation of paper in different languages, usually we learn about that like a year later by accident. So it's going to be a bit complicated, I guess. All right. So now instead, you are going to harvest data yourself. You are the one building the new chatbot, the new AI system. And do you think you're more likely to first check the license of the material, and then if it's all fine, you harvest? Or do you harvest first, and if it's interesting, then you check the license? So if you check the license first, you put a green post-it. And if you think you're very likely to harvest first, and check whether it's actually useful in the license afterwards, you go for blue. Blue is for delay check. All right, there's actually kind of a lot of blue, and I can say that as part of my own PhD, I downloaded like 20 different tools coming from academia. I've used one of them, which I eventually cited properly. I only started to pay attention to the license when the tool that I downloaded actually gave me something. I needed to test it first. So then there's quite a few of you who said, well, yeah, I would download it first, check if it gives me something, and then I check the license. Well, let's see, like, why does that sound more practical for you? You said something fun. What did you put in the code of the 4TU then?
Sorry, what was that?
What did you harvest of the internet and drop in the code base of the 4TU? Did you check the license yet?
We built it from scratch, so we didn't use any other. But so the reason why I would download first and only check licenses after is that first you want to have a complete picture, knowledge picture, and then you can find out with which data sets you can cover the most ground for your knowledge network. And then so you can calculate how much knowledge you're missing if you're excluding parts. And then you can find things that replace that so that you maximize your output, knowledge output, without touching the restrictive licenses. So it actually could lead to a better model in the end if you harvest first, check later.
Pretty reasonable. Someone else has a good reason as to why you should download first and check afterwards?
Simple efficiency, because every time you put more procedural hurdle in front of you accessing the thing, it becomes more difficult. The same reason researchers don't want unnecessary processes in front of them, right? So I would say go ahead and do it and then do it. I also think it's entirely defensible in the sense that the point is, like you said, you only cited the software tool that ended up you actually using it, which I think is a very reasonable standard. There is a lot of data, a lot of things lying around. You read 100 papers, you probably cite only 10, right? It's not that the other 90 papers didn't give you knowledge, right? It gives you it gives you the context and the framing of it, but you don't end up citing, oh, by the way, these are all the papers I read but didn't use. So I think it's the same logic.
So I know that you kind of suggested that we should check first. Do you feel like, well, maybe not, or do you change your mind a bit? But okay. So what was your first reaction then?
My first reaction was to follow the rules, and then my second reaction was to be honest about how things would probably go. So I switched from the green to blue. Yeah.
Yes, we should. Technically, I guess the rules would be you check first. Because we may actually end up harvesting information from the internet that we were never supposed to download in the first place. That's a variation of copyright when you copy something that's kind of written on that. So I guess the quick scan that you could do is check if it's under some kind of CC license that you're vaguely aware of, and without checking the details, and if that's the case, then just harvest, and then figure out what was the modifier on that would be probably all right. You get a copy of a newspaper article onto your computer, you've copied it, and it's copyright, so yes. You downloaded it for professional purposes. That it's not household usage if you download something as part of your research work or your data steward work, or as part of your work. I'm no lawyer, you can totally challenge that.
I guess to even read it, you have to harvest it first. So, and I'm from another time, but it was so normal. You could read all the books, and then you only cite the one you really used. So you have to read it or see it first before you can decide if you are going to use it.
Yes, I agree. What happens is that the information would be available for free for reading on a website. And that doesn't mean that it's free to download on a computer to do whatever you want with it. And maybe that's the moment where... so that's something you would have to check, right? If it's under some kind of CC BY license first. Because otherwise, if you just download stuff off the web, it entirely depends on who produced it and where it is. And then at the moment you copy it, regardless of what it is, you made a copy. And then but I miss Pascalis to tell us more about copyright. All right. And that was kind of short and efficient, but that was a bit the idea. So I do have a random question for you. Do you think that would be worth asking those questions to the research staff? And would the answer sway us in any way, shape, or form? In what we want to pay attention to in the future? You don't speak very loudly, so I have to give you the microphone.
I do indeed, yes, speak very loudly, but just for the sake of those who might be watching the video afterwards. I think the difference between the research support staff, if we want to call it that way, if we want to create a distinction, and the researchers in answering these questions would be that if we asked both honestly, researchers would look at the practical, like how, kind of what I did with the last question, right? They have this, maybe we know the rules, but in practice, this is how it's usually done for the efficiency purposes. Whereas the research support staff would probably know the rules better because that's usually what we're advocating for. That's something that we're supporting the researchers with. And so the rules would come first and the practicality would come second. That's my opinion.
Do you want to say anything? You're just getting the microphone all the time. No? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that I think most research support staff were also researchers, and probably not too long ago. So we kind of have an idea of what it's like to be in both camps. And now being research support staff, we have I don't know, maybe a slightly enhanced view of how things work. So I think the view from the research support staff is valid. But at the same time, I think if researchers think about what they would want, how they would want to access things, and again, this question might have to come from someone in research support because they're thinking about it, then if you put the question in the right way to a active researcher, I think then they would also respond in a reasonable way.
No, I expect that the researchers do want to have all the citations in place, because that's where the whole business is based upon. I have been working on a blog on quantum computing and networking, and that bothered me for a long time because I could not cite. I had problems with citations of the different knowledge I had from articles and things like that, and then I played around with JetGPT, asking JetGPT the questions and doing as if I was presenting the blog as an interview. And yeah, that solved the citation problem. But all the researchers said that's not the way to do it because they really want to have the citations in place.
Right, but then if we have everything in CC BY, tracking citation within other journals, I'm pretty sure we already have tools to try to track that stuff, or maybe do some form of checks because of DOIs and things like that. So there are means to start checking for things. But the thing with AI is that as soon as your stuff has been harvested and mingled with everything else, in the scenario that I presented saying, you know for a fact your information is there, is going to be much more complicated. So tracking how papers and data may be absorbed by AI system, that's going to be much harder. And that's kind of, on some level, I was hoping that people would say, oh, no, we don't care. And then we don't have to track about that. We're just happy for the world to have stuff. But no, that's clearly not. We're going to have to figure it out. So do we need to ask researchers to pinpoint the data sets and the papers that they really suffered on, for which they really want to have a citation, and then we're going to track those? Because otherwise, like, we have to track all output. That's a lot. And tracking means probably having people doing stuff. So anyone aware of how we deal with that right now? When researchers say, oh, I haven't been cited, or like I know they did something, I didn't get my share. How does the complaint process go? Who do they go to? You notice that your paper was mishandled. Maybe a plagiarism or or table used without being cited. That's a good one. Table, they're very identifiable. Or images, like you can figure out whether images was reused for your paper. So you know they've reused stuff and you haven't been cited. Where do you go? Do you go to the... I think you probably have the answer, actually.
How it's going right now. If people see that some of our students are misusing copyrighted images or something, they go to the university and the university brings them to the library and they can get a fine, or they have to identify the student who misused and give a warning. So it's most of the time they are looking for the institute or the company that someone comes from.
So in
Yeah, well, the same. Yeah. We also they also go to the library sometimes. Who will sort it out with other publishers or other institutes who were the ones who they track down the users. So there is a kind of mechanism working. Yeah.
Well, that's actually very reassuring. Thank you.
I think within the university you can go to academic integrity. But I have spoken with them and say, well, it's not going to be at the end good for both sides because you don't want to make a fight or argument with the other colleagues, so they're always trying to avoid. But in science, in research paper has happened to me, 2 of my papers exactly copy-pasted and published in another journals. And I've contacted publisher. I've showed that I have published in 2019, and those papers published in 2020. And I said, well, it's I think the publishers or the editors' task to check first and see if this paper is original or not, and you haven't done it. And the answer was, oh, sorry, at the time that you published it, maybe this journal was not part of, I don't know, Scopus or whatever. So we can't do anything. It's going to be online, but we're going to put the authors in the blacklist for the next thing, which is not adding anything to me and not giving a penalty to those authors. So that's why I say I don't really care anymore if somebody steals, because I cannot take it back anymore, right? I don't take the ownership of what I have done.
But that's an unfortunate event. Your paper are way too popular, but your name is not on it. At least you did a decent work. People took the time to copy it. Does that help at all? Huh. Yeah. Well. Tough stuff. Sorry to hear. Yeah, so reuse of paper, citation, that's already kind of complicated. So as soon as we throw like mass harvest of information on top, the problem is just going to get more complicated. And I guess it's going to be a bit the same every time, just like you did. Do we want to pick a fight with the other institution? If it's Google, I think we will win. Like Google mishandling academic material, they don't want that. But if it's other universities, do we really want to fight with a university? The University of Marrakesh, apparently it's massive. So we have to be careful, I guess. But that was about a bit the idea around how do we feel about our data and the fact that we make it available for everyone. We know it's not going to be used properly every time. And I often tell people, well, if you put an MIT license on your piece of software, you're probably not going to get cited that much. But it's still good to do because we are used to that in software. So our ability to abide by the rule that we set through the open science program, I'm a bit on the fence on how it's done in practice and whether, like, to what extent should we care? And if researchers feel very strongly about their output and getting cited in that way, then we should pay attention as well. And if for some of them, like, maybe that's fine enough if it's a small university, and we can give each other a bit of slack. Oh well. So I hope you had an entertaining, quick discussion about those things, and I'll leave the floor to Alessandra.
Thanks, Nicola. And thanks to everybody who stick around. And yeah, please, for the last time, I'm going to tell you, join the open science community and 4TU ResearchData community for more of this fun stuff. And please also check the Open Science Week program, because this is just Tuesday, but for the rest of the week, there are going to be more and more of these interesting events all around the campus. So have a look and have a great day.